How does a tiny 224 cubic inch V8 from a little company in Indiana go toe-to-toe with Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler and actually hold its own? It was faster, tougher, and smarter than anyone expected. But here's the real question. If it had the muscle to scare Detroit, why did it vanish from the spotlight? That's the journey we're taking today. And by the end, you'll see why this small engine still casts a big shadow in automotive history. The underdog enters the fight. By the late 1940s, Studebaker was staring down an uncomfortable truth. America was moving into a new era of car culture. Flashier, faster, and more powerful machines were rolling out of Detroit every year. Ford had the resources of an industrial empire. GM's Chevrolet division was gearing up for something revolutionary, and Chrysler was about to drop its now legendary Hemi. Studebaker? They were the stubborn outsiders from South Bend, Indiana, with no mega factories, no vast dealer network, and no V8 in sight. For decades, they'd been building dependable straight 6 and straight 8 engines, solid but hardly headline material in the age of horsepower wars. Still, Studebaker had one thing the giants didn't: the freedom to be bold. They couldn't win by being bigger, so they'd have to win by being smarter. Their solution: build a compact V8 that could deliver big performance without the big fuel bills, fit under the hood of their lighter, more aerodynamic cars, and, most importantly, make Detroit nervous. In 1951, they unveiled the Studebaker 224 V8, and the automotive press took notice. It wasn't just that Studebaker had built a V8, it was that they'd built one entirely from scratch, without borrowing or reworking an existing design. For a company their size, that was nothing short of daring. Small but mighty, the birth of the 224. On paper, the Studebaker 224's stats didn't sound like anything that would send shockwaves through Detroit. Roughly 120 horsepower and about 190 pound-feet of torque. Those figures might seem modest, even tame, compared to the big block bruisers that would come later in the decade. But the numbers only told part of the story, and in true Studebaker fashion, the real magic was in how it all came together. This engine was compact, tidy, and purpose-built, with a short-stroke design that allowed it to rev quickly and cleanly. That shorter stroke meant less reciprocating mass, so it could spin up to speed without feeling strained or sluggish. Unlike some rivals of the era that shook, rattled, and protested at higher RPMs, the 224 felt lively and refined, almost eager to climb through the rev range. There was a smoothness to its delivery that made it equally at home puttering through town or stretching its legs on the open road. Matched with the relatively light weight of a Studebaker Champion or Commander, both designed with sleeker, more aerodynamic bodies than many Detroit sedans, the 224 didn't have to work as hard to move the car. This translated to a driving experience that felt sharper and more responsive than the spec sheet suggested. It was quick off the line, confident in passing maneuvers, and happy to cruise all day without breaking a sweat. Here's a nugget that Studebaker enthusiasts still love to point out. The 224 was one of the very first modern overhead valve V8s available to American buyers outside the Big Three. For an independent automaker with nowhere near the resources of Ford, GM, or Chrysler, that was a bold leap into the future. And it paid off. Drivers noticed right away. This wasn't just a good small V8, it was a smart one, delivering smooth acceleration, stable highway cruising, and fuel consumption that undercut the thirsty, heavyweight monsters rolling out of Detroit. It wasn't built to intimidate, it was built to outperform where it mattered most. Taking on Detroit's heavy hitters, Studebaker's engineers had their work cut out for them. By 1954, Ford had introduced its Y-block V8, Chevy was preparing to unleash its now legendary small block 265, and Chrysler's firepower Hemi was the muscle king. In showroom spec battles, the 224 couldn't match the cubic inches or top-end horsepower of these rivals. But in the real world, it was a different story. Owners discovered that the 224, paired with Studebaker's aerodynamic body designs, could cruise comfortably at highway speeds all day long. On long trips, Studebakers often returned several miles per gallon, better than their Detroit rivals. In an era when cross-country driving was becoming a cultural pastime, that mattered. Drivers didn't just want power, They wanted a car that could make it from Chicago to Denver without feeling like it had been through a war. One former owner recalled in a letter to a Studebaker enthusiast magazine that his 1953 Commander with a 224 would walk away from his brother-in-law's early Ford V8 on long uphill stretches, not because it had more raw power, but because it held its speed without overheating or struggling. That reliability won Studebaker plenty of quiet converts. From Main Street to the racetrack, Studebaker didn't just keep the 224 on the showroom floor, they put it to the test on the racetrack. NASCAR in the early 1950s wasn't the corporate, polished machine it is today. It was a brutal test of endurance, with cars running close to stock and pushed to their limits. The 224-powered Studebakers didn't dominate, but they did something equally important. They finished races. In long-distance stock car events, where many cars dropped out due to mechanical failure, the Studebaker 5.8 often kept going. That toughness was noticed by both drivers and fans. At small-town drag strips, local racers discovered that with a little work, a hotter cam, a bigger carburetor, and a freer-flowing exhaust, the 224 could surprise much larger engines. In the hands of budget-conscious hot rodders, it became a kind of secret weapon, especially in lighter coupes. It wasn't going to win every showdown, but it had a knack for humbling overconfident rivals who underestimated it. Studebaker's secret weapon. Here's the part of the story that really cements the 224's legacy. It was designed with the future in mind. Studebaker's engineers knew they couldn't afford to redesign their V8 every few years like the Big Three, so they built the block strong enough to handle much larger displacements down the road. That decision paid off. Over the years, Studebaker bored and stroked the original 224 design into 232, 259, and 289 cubic inch versions. By the early 1960s, high-performance R-Series variants were running superchargers and making serious horsepower, all from the same basic architecture as that first little V8. In other words, the 224 wasn't just a good engine in its own right. It was the foundation of an entire family of engines that powered Studebaker's most exciting cars for nearly 2 decades. The pressure builds. But even the smartest designs can't escape market reality. By the mid-1950s, America was obsessed with bigger numbers. Buyers weren't comparing horsepower to weight ratios, they were comparing cubic inches and brochure specs. A 224 cubic inch engine, no matter how capable, didn't have the showroom appeal of a 265 Chevy, a 272 Ford, or a 331 Hemi. Studebaker recognized this and quietly phased the 224 out in favor of larger displacements, using the same basic block, but with bigger bore and stroke. The engine had done its job. It had gotten Studebaker into the V8 game, but the badge on the fender had to keep up with the times. The legacy lives on. Today, the 224 is remembered fondly by collectors and Studebaker enthusiasts. Restorers love its simplicity. No exotic parts, no unnecessary complexity, just a solid, well-built V8 that does what it's supposed to do. More than that, it's a piece of living history. Pop the hood on an early 50s Commander, and you'll see a little engine that helped an underdog brand punch far above its weight. For some owners, that's part of the fun. Driving a car that doesn't just tell a story, but tells one that most people have never heard. In the collector market, 224-powered Studebakers aren't the most expensive classics, but they have a loyal following. At shows, you'll often hear owners swapping stories about surprising modern cars on back roads, or about how their Studebaker just runs year after year without complaint. An extra twist, the engine that refused to die. Even after it left the production line, the 224's story didn't end. Its robust construction made it perfect for all sorts of secondary lives. Farmers bolted them into old trucks and machinery. Racers used them as budget-friendly swap candidates. In some rural areas, the Studebaker V8 developed a quiet cult following among mechanics who appreciated its toughness and ease of repair. One legend tells of a Nebraska farmer who ran a 224 in a grain truck for decades, only finally pulling it when the truck's frame gave out. The engine, according to his grandson, looked like it had been through a war, but still fired right up after sitting in the barn for 10 years. That's the kind of reputation you can't buy. It's earned one hard mile at a time. Even today, aftermarket support for Studebaker 5/8 exists, with parts available from specialist suppliers. And at certain classic car meets, you can still find builders who know these engines inside and out, ready to coax more life from a block that first saw daylight when Truman was in the White House. Studebaker's 224 V8 might have been small, but it was mighty in all the ways that matter. It gave a struggling, independent automaker the firepower it needed to stand shoulder to shoulder with Detroit's best. It proved itself on highways, in races, and in the hands of everyday drivers who valued reliability just as much as raw power. It laid the foundation for some of Studebaker's most memorable performance cars, and even after it was phased out, its DNA lived on for decades. This wasn't just an engine. It was a declaration that size isn't everything, and that sometimes the smartest design wins the fight. So next time someone tells you only the biggest engines make the biggest impact, tell them about the 224. Tell them about the little V8 from South Bend that dared to challenge Detroit's giants and earned its place in history. And if you enjoyed riding shotgun through this underdog tale, don't just disappear into the algorithm. Hit subscribe, stick around, and join us next time as we dig into more forgotten machines that deserve their day in the sun.